All right, let's get started. Thank you, everyone here for attending the first Risk Mitigation Accountability Workshop of 2026. My name is Emily, and I'm a regulatory analyst at the Safety Policy Division. I'll be hosting and presenting this workshop with my colleague, Tony Castelletto. We also have Matthew Raffleson from Level 4 assisting us with answering any questions you may have. A couple workshop logistics. Attendees have the ability to mute and unmute themselves, but please stay muted except during the Q&A and discussion periods. Attendees can raise their hand to ask questions or enter their questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer all your questions during the Q&A period. If there's not enough time to respond to all questions in the chat, SPD will collect answers to those questions and circulate them to the service list after the workshop. And just so you know, this meeting is being recorded. One or more decision makers may be present, but no decisions will be taken. Next slide, please. Thank you, Tony. Our safety message today is about carbon monoxide safety. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, colorless gas that kills without warning. You can't see it, can't smell it, and can't hear it. It kills hundreds of people every year and makes thousands ill. Many household items, including gas and oil burning furnaces, portable generators, and charcoal grills produce this gas. You can prevent carbon monoxide poisoning by installing detectors, have furnaces inspected, and not use portable generators inside a home. Now, let's do a roll call. Do we have PG&E on the line?
Yes, we are present here.
Thank you. SCE?
Yes, SCE is present.
Sempra companies?
Yes, we're present. Thank you.
Thank you. The Public Advocate's Office?
Yes, we are here.
Thank you. TURN, the Utility Reform Network?
Yes, Turn it's here.
Thank you. EPUC-IS, Energy Producers and Users Coalition and Indicated Shippers?
Yes, Jim Mosier here for EPUC and IS.
Thank you. MGRA, Musty Gray Road Alliance? PCF, Protect Our Communities Foundation? UCAN, Utility Consumers Action Network? Are there other parties present? Please identify yourself. Okay. Next slide, please. Here's the agenda for the workshop. We begin with introductions, which we just did, and agenda review. Then we will go over the background and purpose of this workshop. SPD will then present the RMAR staff proposal number 2. We call this the RMAR staff proposal number 2 to distinguish it from the RMAR staff proposal that was filed in phase 4 of the RDF proceeding. Attendees will have an opportunity to ask questions about the presentation. Then we will have a 15-minute break. And after the break, we will have a discussion period on specific questions about the staff proposal. Finally, we'll go over next steps and close out the workshop. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As many of you already know, the Phase 4 decision identified a list of RMAR-related issues. The Commission recommended that SPD hold a workshop or workshops on these issues before issuing a resolution for comment. The issues are timing of the first RMAR submission and cadence of regular updates, final approach for utility accountability, demonstrate confidence that observed results were due to mitigation effectiveness as opposed to other factors, change control procedures for maintaining consistency and comparability over time, as well as triggers for recast, backcast, and replans, and which RMAR tables are required in the original ramp backcast, additional RMAR required elements, and how changes can be made to the RMAR guidelines. In this workshop, SPD will address all these issues except for utility accountability, which is safe for future workshops. SPD has also issued a call for proposal on this topic. Party proposals are due February 9th. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The following information is not new to many of you here, but we'll go over them anyway to provide a high-level overview of what an RMAR is. SPD envisioned the RMAR as a consolidated statement of risk, which is similar to consolidated financial reports that provide evaluators with a holistic view of an organization and its major subgroups. The financial reports consist of tables that dissect different aspects of financial performance, yet always can be consolidated to the whole. In a similar vein, the primary purpose of a consolidated statement of risk is to present aggregated risk and risk reduction at the level of the enterprise and major subgroups such as risk event, attribute, and tranche levels. A consolidated statement of risk would consist of standardized tables that examine risk and risk reduction from a variety of perspectives. Standardized tables ensure that risk information is presented in a consistent way and that results can be compared across utilities. The RMAR has two phases, the plan phase and the reporting phase. Next slide, please. The plan phase includes forecasts, which are future estimates of line item values typically based on outputs from a model and/or SME judgment. Forecast values are established in a decision adopted in a GRC or other cost recovery venue. Forecasts will be used for comparing against monetized outcomes, results, and projections in the reporting phase. The reporting phase includes all four scenarios: forecasts, monetized outcomes, results, and projections. According to the RMAR guidelines, monetized outcomes are defined as the monetized impact of risk events that have occurred in a given year. This could be estimated using, but not limited to, the safety performance metrics. Results are defined as the impact of mitigation activities that have occurred in a given year. In the case of mitigation benefits, results are the monetized value calculated from a model based on the mitigation activities. In the case of mitigation costs or work units, results are based on actual costs incurred or actual work units performed. Projections are forecasts of future line item values unique to the reporting phase, which is typically based on outputs from a model and/or SME judgment, like the forecast. Next slide, please. This slide contains the tables for the plan phase and reporting phase. All the tables are required except the tail risk reduction by risk event table. We won't be going through these tables, and as you will see, SPD will be recommending the addition of another table to the reporting phase. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The first RMAR-related issue identified in the Phase 4 decision is the timing of the first RMAR submission and cadence of regular updates. For this issue, SPD recommends the adoption of two RMAR filing schedules. As discussed before, the plan phase is based on the outcomes in a GRC and typically cannot be completed until a GRC is resolved. Therefore, SPD recommends that IOUs complete and submit the plan phase table 6 months after a decision containing the forecast values is adopted, so that parties do not have to wait until the first annual RMAR submission to review the plan phase. We can discuss later whether 6 months is too long of a time frame to submit the plan phase. Intervenor comments on the plan phase are due 80 days after it is filed, and CPUC division review is due 180 days after. The reporting phase includes reported risk reduction after mitigation is implemented and the actual risk events that occur. The reporting phase tables can only be completed after at least 1 year has transpired in a GRC cycle. SPD recommends that annual complete RMAR filings follow the RSAR filing schedule. And by complete RMAR filing, we mean both the plan phase and reporting phase. Annual RMARs should be submitted for each year in the GRC cycle. The first annual RMAR submission in a GRC cycle should be due on April 30th following the test year. Subsequent annual RMAR submissions would also be due on the same date. Same as the RSAR filing schedule, intervenor comments are due on July 21st, and CPUC division reviews are due on October 31st annually. Next slide, please. SPD further recommends that the timing of a utility's annual RMAR submission should align with a new GRC cycle. PG&E's new GRC cycle begins in 2027, Sempra in 2028, and SCE in 2029. Based on these, PG&E should submit its first annual RMAR on April 30th, 2028, Sempra on April 30th, 2029, and SCE on April 30th, 2030. RMAR titles should identify the IOU, the test year of the relevant GRC, and the reporting year. Dan, I see your hand up. Would you please hold off to your question until the question section at the end of this presentation, or please enter your question in the chat, and Matthew is currently monitoring the chat and will respond to your question. As I was saying, excuse me, the RMAR titles should identify the IOU, the test year of the relevant GRC, and the reporting year. Next slide, please. Ideally, there would be 4 annual RMAR submissions for a GRC cycle. With the 4th submission, the Commission would determine whether a utility has met its risk mitigation and/or risk reduction targets. However, as with many construction projects, complex risk mitigation projects may require more than 4 years to complete. For risk mitigation projects that span multiple GRC cycles, SPD recommends that the utility continue reporting on the relevant risk mitigations and/or risk events until the projects are used and useful. For example, if the funding for an undergrounding project is approved in a hypothetical 2025 to 2028 GRC cycle, and construction begins in the same GRC cycle, but the project is not used and useful until 2030, the utility should continue to update the RMAR on wildfire risk for the 2025 to 2028 GRC cycle. This is in addition to submitting separate RMARs for the current GRC cycle. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Another RMAR-related issue is determining how the utility should demonstrate its confidence that observed results were due to mitigation effectiveness as opposed to other factors. In the staff proposal, staff provided some methods on achieving this, such as outcome and results analysis, input analysis, and statistical analysis. Outcome and results analysis is for high-frequency events. This analysis includes trend analysis of outcomes, test and control of outcomes, outcomes versus model results, and reference class forecasting. Input analysis is for rare events, and this includes analysis of mitigation implementation effectiveness, trend analysis of key risk drivers, test and control for key risk drivers, and near-miss analysis. The goal of the statistical analysis is to determine whether the observed differences between actual or modeled risk and the baseline could have occurred by chance. There is a group of statistical techniques under the umbrella of hypothesis testing that can help us determine if risk reduction is real and due to mitigation efforts. Although we are not requiring the usage of a specific method, we are recommending that an IOU be required to present a methodology demonstrating its confidence that observed results were due to mitigation effectiveness. The methodology should include, but is not limited to, any quantitative methods and analysis used, any experimental procedures, and any supporting data sets. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The third and fourth issues are about change control and the original ramp backcast. The staff proposal discusses several types of changes. Real changes to the risk environment include changes to pre-mitigated risks, possibly due to new data regarding climate change, changes in mitigation timing, changes in mitigation effectiveness, perhaps due to improved technology, variances in capital and operating expenditures, and whatnot. Changes due to organization, models, and data, or subjective factors such as assumptions or opinions related to risk modeling have nothing to do with real changes in risk or real mitigation impact. They are unavoidable over the long periods covered by RMAR. The purpose of RMAR is to enable evaluation based on the first type of change, which is real changes to the risk environment. But we also need to capture and adjust for the second type of change. To manage risk reporting through changes over time requires utilities to develop the appropriate infrastructure and processes. These developments must include storing and accessing each scenario, such as a forecast, projection, monetized outcome, or result, as well as each version of a model. The ability to compare and report on forecasts versus prior projection scenarios. This requirement becomes necessary if the original plan is updated with new forecasts multiple times, which is possible over an RMAR period that spans multiple years. It will likely be infeasible to report every possible change from version to version and back to the original. To do so would require a replica RMAR for each combination of version changes. Instead, RMAR should include bridging tables and narratives that capture the key impacts of the changes. These bridging tables establish that RMAR trends, variances, and comparisons are truthfully representing the risk environment, not organization and method changes. The processes to enable these bridging tables and narratives include recasting, backcasting, and replanning. Recasting is modeling the current scenario as if the original state of the organization was still in place. Recasting ensures that the current scenario is apples to apples with original baselines, business cases, and plans. Any variances and other changes can be attributed to real changes in the risk environment. Recasting requires organizations to maintain organizational hierarchies, models, and data from the original plan. The downside to recasting is that it fails to capture any useful information due to improved models, data, and new learnings about the risk environment. Backcasting achieves the same apples-to-apples comparison with the original plan, this time by restating the history in terms of current models, data, and knowledge. Backcasting has the advantage of incorporating the most current views on the risk environment. Models and data must be backward compatible with risk modeling history and the original plan for backcasting to be possible. In rare circumstances, drift over time from the original plan due to numerous model changes and unforeseen events may require a restatement of the plan. The original plan, including history and future years, is restated based on current reality. This is replanning. There must be strict regulatory approval process for a replan. SPD expects replans to be rare though. Next slide, please. For
Emily,
recast,
I've had my hand up. I think, I know you said, this is Brian from Medicine. I know you said we should wait to the end, but we have some substantive questions. If we could go back some slides and have some quick conversation on it, it would really be appreciated.
okay, which slide would you like to go back on, Brian?
So we have questions on slide 12, questions on slide 14, questions on slide 15, questions on slide 16. So let's start on slide 12. And I think Dan Kamala is going to field this question for us.
Yeah, question I have here is if you look at the plan phase, so we'll file 6 months after, and then CPUC is another 6 months. So that's 12 months, a year after a GRC decision. It seems like we would have to file the first reporting RMAR before that happens. And what happens then? Do we delay the RMAR report until after we get feedback on the plan phase?
Well, typically a GRC is resolved right before the test year starts. So
that hasn't been the case lately, though.
I guess it's just something to think of because it seems like this schedule, we would need to be filing extension requests, or we would need to be doing that almost annually, at least in the initial plan phase and reporting phase. After that plan phase is filed, the annual ones would be fine because we'd already have the decision.
Yeah,
but that's just something we wanted to bring up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. Sorry, please. I heard someone was talking, but then it cut out.
Sorry, this is
Go ahead.
this is Russell Archer. To my recollection, I cannot remember the last time the commission approved a GRC before the start of the test year. So I think that's a relevant data.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Russell. We would appreciate to hear this issue in comments. Again, we have discussion questions directed at this schedule, and parties are welcome to present an alternative filing schedule if they see any issues with it. So we appreciate you sharing more thoughts on this when the discussion questions section comes, as well as in your opening comments.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Yeah, Brian, what was the next slides you had?
Yeah, so if we can go to slide 15. Thanks, Emily. So on slide 15, when we talk about, I'm sorry, 16, next one. So when we talk about this one, is absence of an event proof that we were actually effective? So there's some logical things that we would have to figure out here. And I'll give you an example. We perform a lot of mitigations on hydro assets, and we have not had an event yet. So by this, we would have to prove that what we did was effective. Is that the understanding? Absence of exogenous events?
Thank you for your question, Brian. For this question, I'm going to defer to Matthew from level 4.
Okay, so no, there's ways to assess in rare events whether you think it's just by chance or by that the mitigations were effective. But I encourage, these are all questions that should wait to the Q&A. This is not good to derail the meeting this way. So Emily, I think you should just go on, and people can put these questions in the chat and go on. This is not your meeting.
Thank you.
This is not your meeting, Brian. We need to keep going. Stop.
Yeah, Matt,
go ahead. Go ahead, Emily.
I don't appreciate that tone, but I'm really trying to get to the answer to some of these questions. I think this is for the utilities, so I really want to get to these questions.
Brian, I think Matthew is right, though. We have timed the SPD presentation part to be relatively short. I think we only have a couple more slides to go through. I don't anticipate our presentation to last more than 15 minutes. So if we can get through the presentation, we will have a lot of time to go through your questions as well as others. And if we don't have we can't get through all of your questions, please send them to us. We will compile the answers and circulate them to the service list. Again, many of your questions, we are open to hearing suggestions, alternative solutions, alternative filing schedules in your opening comments as well. So for now, let's get back to the slides. I believe we only have a couple to go through. Can we go?
I appreciate that, Emily. Let's continue to go to the slides, but just in the future, I think we need to understand if this is going to be a presentation or a workshop. So we just need to get to that understanding.
We do have Q&A sessions and we do have discussion sections. So let's go back to slide 19, Tony. Thank you. As I was saying, for change control for the recast and backcast, the triggers should include organization changes, risk model changes, and changes to the original model values that exceed a certain threshold. The triggers for recast and backcast are the same because both methods achieve the same goal of ensuring apples-to-apples comparison between the current scenario and the original plan. Because backcasting has the advantage of incorporating the most current views on the risk environment, a utility should always perform a backcast when required. If a backcast is not possible, then a utility may perform a recast. Triggers for replan include significant organizational changes, systematic errors in modeling, and formal CPUC procedures that change the forecast in the plan phase. Next slide, please. For the original ramp backcast, the phase 4 decision asks which RMAR tables should be filled out. Currently, the staff proposal number 2 recommends that all RMAR tables should be filled out for the original ramp backcast. However, we are going to revise this section. According to the first RMAR staff proposal, the original ramp backcast does not need to be at the same level of detail as RMAR and would serve to capture a more holistic view of risk and risk reduction since the beginning of the RDF process. Therefore, SPD does not recommend any RMAR tables to be completed with the original ramp backcast because the original ramp backcast should be done at a high level. However, going forward, recast and backcast must include all the required RMAR tables to maintain comparability within each table. Any table that does not have a recast or backcast cannot be compared and is unusable. Now I will hand the presentation over to my colleague Tony, who will present on the change process for the RMAR guidelines and additional RMAR table requirements SPD is recommending.
Pardon me, I forgot to unmute myself. So making changes to the RMAR guidelines should follow the same process for making changes to the ramp data template, including the use of the ramp data template notification list and the ramp data inbox. SPD or any utility or non-utility party may propose one or more changes to the required elements in the RMAR guidelines by serving a document detailing the proposed changes and a rationale for each proposed change to the ramp data template notification list. Parties shall have 15 calendar days to comment on a proposed change and 15 calendar days to reply to comments. Comments may support, oppose, and/or suggest modifications to the proposed changes and should include the rationale for any recommendations or positions taken. After the conclusion of the comment periods on proposed changes, SPD may issue a disposition letter to the ramp data template notification list approving one or more proposed changes. The disposition letter should explain any approved changes, address comments received, and explain proposed changes not approved. SPD may approve in the same disposition letter changes proposed by more than one party and or more than one document, and may also convene workshops or working group meetings to discuss any proposed changes. Within 15 calendar days of a disposition letter from the SPD, any party may file and serve upon SPD the ramp data template notification list a protest to SPD's disposition on approved changes. The protest shall explain the reason for the party's objection to the approved changes. Any party may, within 15 calendar days of a protest being served, serve a response to such a protest to SPD in the ramp data template notification list. After receiving a protest to its disposition letter, SPD may prepare a draft resolution for commission consideration of the disputed changes. Alternatively, SPD may prepare and serve to the ramp data notification list a modified disposition letter. SPD may propose modifications to this process for making changes or modifications to the required elements in the RMAR guidelines by preparing a resolution for consideration by the Commission. Prior to mailing a draft resolution proposing such modifications, SPD shall provide an explanation of its proposed modifications to the ramp data template notification list, and parties shall have 30 calendar days to comment. Note, if staff decides to convene a workshop on any recommended changes that are controversial, then the party who proposed the change is expected to present during the workshop. The staff proposal recommends adding a companion stock table to the expected value risk mitigation benefit and mitigation cost by risk event table, which currently tracks only flow. Before I dive into this new stock table, we should review the concepts of stock and flow. These are pretty simple ideas as depicted on the picture to the left. Stocks are snapshots of quantities in time, but some people might call cross sections. Flow represents change in time. In the example table here, Y1 is the stock at the beginning of the period, Y3 is the stock at the end of the period. The totals represent the flow accumulating over time. The additional recommended table here is a new stock table. It is the companion to the table C flow table. It compares how much risk mitigation reduced risk against what was forecast for year 3. The BW columns on the right of the subtable, one here compare the results for risk reduction versus the projections to see whether the mitigations perform better or worse than the forecast. The red numbers represent values that were worse than the forecast by the end of year 3. And here in the subtable 2, which is part of the stock table, you see how it tracks the mitigation results by year. An additional suggestion for improving RMAR reports includes adding total fields and comparison fields. We see these improvements here. The totals are columns highlighted in the reddish shade. The bottom highlighted row is the compared to what field. In this case, the comparison is between the current risk and the pre-mitigation risk. And that concludes our presentation. Any questions?
So we're free to ask questions now?
Yes, please raise your hand, and please be
Okay.
mindful that others may have questions. Thank you, Miles.
Hey, Miles Gordon, Public Advocate's Office. I have a question about the RMAR guidelines changes. Because so the parallel reporting mechanism, the risk spending accountability reports, those, to my knowledge, those guidelines have to be changed via a new RDF phase if those guidelines were to be changed, or some other more formal rulemaking mechanism. And I'm just wondering, like, why why the mechanism for changing the reporting guidelines for the RMAR would be different. But B, if we adopted this informal process, would SPD envision moving RSAR guidelines changes to a similar, more informal process?
To answer your question, we are considering this process to change RMAR guidelines outside of a rulemaking because it was stated in the Phase 4 decision that staff should address the issue of coming up with a process to address changes in the RMAR without the need of a commission rulemaking or resolution. So it was directed in the Phase 4 decision. And B, to your question, whether we are going to consider changes to the RSAR guideline, that is something we have not thought about yet, and that is not the topic of this workshop. Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to slide 16 in a second, but I want to go to slide 18, if you will. Yeah, so in slide 18, what would these only be substantial changes, or what is the threshold for some of these changes? They seem overly broad. So if you could give us some context there, that would be really helpful.
Are you talking about the first column changes?
Well, any of these, right? So like what constitutes an organizational change? Is it just any officer moving, or what constitutes a change in the risk environment? Is it 1%, 10%, 20%?
So if you read the staff proposal number 2, as well as the original RMAR staff proposal, this proposal does give examples and discuss these changes. In regards to the threshold level, that is a question in the discussion section. So we expect parties to provide input on that.
Okay. And then also for recasting, backcasting, and replanning, are we going to talk about that as well? Same thing with the changes, the substantiveness of the changes itself?
Yes, we also have a discussion question on what parties think about the triggers that we have proposed, and parties are welcome to provide triggers of their own in opening comments.
Okay, and if you look at slides 8 or 19, I think the next slide. So some of these, and these are some examples, right? So some of these are just, they'll happen every single year. So I just want to make sure we get a good understanding of these and what you're expecting.
Yes, so Brian, if you look at the last bullet point, we understand that some of these changes may happen very frequently. So we are only asking for recast and backcast to be done when these changes affects the original model values at a certain threshold level. So again, what is that threshold level? We are asking for party input.
Okay, and if you can go to slide 16 again, I'm going to ask this question slightly differently. So what would be substantial enough to prove mitigation effectiveness in the mind of the CPUC in terms of hypothesis testing and mitigation effectiveness?
I am going to call on Matthew to help with this question as he was already answering this question before.
Yeah. So Brian, we envision this to be more of a narrative discussion kind of thing, because I think what you're getting at is you never know for sure, but to have the utility to say, based on history before the mitigation and what has happened since then, here's why we're pretty confident that the mitigations, are largely responsible. And that that it would require some analysis to back it up, but this would be a narrative section. Does that help?
Maybe, but thanks for that additional context.
Jim?
Yeah, back on slide 10, when we were talking about all the tables, and at the bottom, we mentioned that tail risk is the only optional table. I want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this, that if an IOU relies upon risk scaling or tail risk analysis for justifying its mitigation proposals in its RAMP or its GRC, particularly the GRC, is the tail risk table still optional if that tail risk was relied upon to fund projects or to propose funding of projects? And I'll just say my interpretation was it's optional only because in the RDF tail risk analysis was optional. But if the option is exercised, I would think the table would need to be included, but I wanted to be sure about that.
Yes, that is a good point. We would like to hear more about this in comments. That is a good point you brought up. We will take it back and think about this. Thank you. Russell, I think you have your hand up next.
Thank you. I just want to go back to this concept of proving that the mitigation was effective or ineffective, and appreciate the additional context. I do have some initial concerns and observations, though, and I'll note that in my mind, at least, it's much easier, it will be much easier to demonstrate that a mitigation was ineffective if there is an event that occurs, because presumably you can analyze that event, assess the root cause, and determine whether or not the event occurred because the mitigation failed or because of some exogenous factor that is outside of the mitigation's ambit. So to me, that situation is, in most cases, doable. The opposite, though, is much trickier. To demonstrate that mitigation was effective in the absence of an adverse event will be extraordinarily difficult, and I appreciate that the staff anticipates more of a narrative discussion, but I think you're going to get a lot of uncertainty, caveats, and sort of philosophical musings about why things didn't happen. Just to go back to the hydro dam failure, you have a hydro dam failure event. If you're unlucky once in 100 years, it's really difficult, in my mind, to tease out what happened to prevent the dam from failing, given that dams fail so infrequently. That's also, I think, more relevantly, because the biggest risk, obviously, that the utilities are facing and our customers are facing are, from a grid standpoint, are wildfires. And you have years where there are very few, statistically, very few wildfires or very few catastrophic wildfires. And then you have other years that are quite bad. And the overwhelming driver of that delta is weather. So you could normalize it for weather, and that would be one way to assess mitigation effectiveness. But I just want to caution that whatever approach is ultimately decided upon, there will be a great deal of uncertainty in those narrative descriptions of effectiveness or ineffectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell, for your comment. We do understand that this is a difficult task, which is why we are not requiring a specific methodology for doing this. We are open to hearing the utilities, the methodologies, and how they approach this issue. Matthew, is there something you would like to add?
Yes. First, I want to acknowledge that the point made is correct, especially when you have rare events like that. The absence of a rare event, doesn't necessarily prove that the mitigations were effective. And there's always going to be uncertainty around it. There's still value of having the discussion. And one of the things I would expect to see is looking at upstream drivers of the event. You use weather for wildfires, and of course that's not a controllable, but there's quite a bit of upstream drivers that are controllable. So you can look at numbers of your equipment failure rates, downed lines due to vegetation. You could point to large reductions in those as being, contributing reasons why there wasn't a big event. Number of ignitions are down that, happen not to turn into a large wildfire. So it's looking into that kind of upstream context to paint a picture of, well, we've done mitigations and there are things that are happening that we know contribute to the wildfire, and those things are improving. That's valuable information for evaluators. Does it prove that the mitigations work? No, but it certainly gives you some more confidence that things are moving in the right direction. Okay, that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Matthew. Ali, you have your hand up.
Yes, Ali Arabnia of PG&E. Nice to meet you all. We appreciate this workshop and the information that has been provided. So we want to start with we have gone through this document extensively, discussed that with the team. There were a few things. I don't know if we wanted to ask for clarification about a few elements of the RMAR framework. Most importantly, backcasting and recasting. There are different ways of going about it. There's a difference now, when you build a model and you test those models as opposed to testing the outcome, forward-looking observations that are going to be realized from those models. We would appreciate more clarification in the context of RMAR. What is the expectation and what is the definition of backcasting and recasting to make sure we are all on the same page? I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, for your question. Matthew, is that a question you can take to provide more clarification on backcast and recast for RMAR?
Sure. So let's first talk about the difference between the two. What a recast says is we're going to take the models and data that were used for the original forecast and apply that to the current situation. So now we have the report phase and the forecast phase using the same apples-to-apples methodology, and any variance there can be considered due to the risk environment and not due to model changes. Okay, so the important thing, the recast is using the original models and data for everything. The advantage of it is that should be easy to do because it's a requirement to keep the original models and data. The disadvantage is that you're not getting any of the benefit from any improvements in the modeling environment and the data environment, but at least you still have an apples-to-apples comparison for the purpose of evaluating mitigation impact. By contrast, the backcast would be, you now have these new and improved models. Let's use those models against the original data that was used for the forecast and recreate the apples to apples that way. And so it would be as though the original forecast was done with the benefit of the current modeling environment. We recognize that things may change to the point where that either becomes difficult or not possible. But the advantage is if you can do it, the RMAR will now be reflecting the latest and greatest of our models and data and everything that we know, and still produce apples to apples results between the report phase and the forecast phase. Does that help?
Absolutely. If I may have a follow-up question for additional
Sure.
clarity, it was very helpful. In terms of the reference for time reference, assuming that we are at time present, we want to do backcasting and recasting, is that fair to say what do you mean by recast is at this point, we look back from time zero being today, looking at all models and observation and additional data set that have become available, and recalibrate the model with additional data and the risk environment that has changed and observation that we had. And when it comes to backcasting, we're looking at future scenarios. It's forward-looking, and we're looking more than one set of outcome as a result of backcasting. Is that a fair assessment?
No. Important point. Let's use the time periods. Let's say we're in year 3. And for year 3, we've had a new suite of models. And the forecast, of course, is done at year 0 at the beginning. The recast would be, we're going to restate year 3 using the models that we did at time 0. Okay. The backcast is, we are going to restate time 0 based on the models that we're using in time 3. And so now all my modeled results in year 3 can be compared back to what we forecasted in either scenario. This has nothing to do with the future periods, which are important in RMAR, and the word for that is, we call those projections. But the recast and backcasts are backward-looking processes.
In the context of RMR. Okay.
Yes.
No, that's very helpful, because there are versions of backcasting that you look into the future as opposed to, backcasting versus forecasting. Both of them look into the future, and recasting and past casting both look into, it's more like a backward looking, but they come up with different. But this was very helpful. I appreciate you, Matthew.
Yeah. We understand that in other context, these words may have slightly different meanings, and so we've taken some pains to try to define them as carefully as we can for RMAR purposes. But thanks for the question.
I appreciate it.
Gary?
Hi, this is Gary from SCE. Could we go to slide 23? So my understanding is that every single year within a GRC period, we will fill in year 1, year 2, year 3, right? We would just incrementally add on. So what if we have something like a 50-year life mitigation? How do we continue this for 50 years, or how does that work?
Gary, we're only asking you to report on the risk mitigation until it becomes useful. So if you are taking 10 years to complete the project, then you would have 10 years. You would be reporting on 10 years. Did I answer your question?
No,
we could go back to a previous slide. I believe we have another slide showing this. Tony, could you go back up a few slides with the RMAR and GRC mapping? Tony, can you hear me? I think maybe Tony's
Nope. Sorry, I had my mic double muted. Did you want me to go forwards or backwards in the presentation?
Backwards.
All right. There we go.
Yes, this one. Okay. So if I understand you correctly, you're asking about mitigation projects that goes beyond of the typical 4 years.
No, I think my question is a little bit different. Let's just say that the GRC year is 25 to 28, right? So let's just say I was able to deploy my project in 2025, okay? But this, in order to get my full benefit stream of this project, I need to wait 40 years in order to see my full benefit stream of this project, right? Maybe an undergrounding project I need a full lifetime of it to see my full benefit stream in order to calculate the full benefit stream, and then the BCR calculations in that stock and flow diagram. So it's the idea that I have to do this for 40 years capturing the risk reduction every single year for 40 years. Does that make sense?
Right. Matthew, do you have a response to that? I don't believe our RMAR tables capture 40 years for any mitigation.
So, so Gary, yes, we actually, had contemplated that, and where we're coming in is, no, we're not going to be tracking for 40 years and looking at it. It's once the mitigation has become used and useful, we should know enough. And Emily, this is actually a good question. The report probably should go to use and useful plus 1 year, so we have at least one report phase when the mitigation is done. But after a year, we ought to have some sense of how effective is the mitigation, and then you'd basically say we'd extrapolate that out for the life of the asset to calculate the benefits at that point.
Only after 1 year, you're saying we can determine useful.
I think that's a reasonable question for us to get input on. We're trying to balance not having to go out 10 to 20 years on this stuff, because that's onerous for everybody. But to your point, it does need to go out long enough so you can make a reasonably good estimate of what the long-term impact of this mitigation is for BCR calculations. So I think that should be a question for how many years. Is it? We know it has to be go to at least used and useful. How many years after that should it go before we can make a good enough estimate?
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
Thank you, Matthew. Chris?
Thank you, Chris Parks with Cal Advocates. Actually, I raised my hand to talk about the effectiveness discussion that I think Matthew was responding to earlier, but it relates to this topic as well. So, because we were actually looking to flag this as something where it could be worthwhile to have some input from everyone on the issue of tracking mitigation effectiveness and how to measure mitigation effectiveness for events that are infrequent. So in tracking mitigation effectiveness, it makes sense to me that it's going to need to go beyond when the implementation is becoming used and useful. It's at that point that I think the utility will actually be able to get a real solid sense of how effective that mitigation is. And so it makes sense then to continue to evaluate that and then get that feedback, close that loop, and understand the real value of that mitigation. So collecting data beyond the point where the implementation is used and useful, I think is going to be very useful information to the commission and the parties and everyone. And that way it will also be able to help folks understand what are the best practices and really are the forecasts being realized. So if a utility or operator is forecasting a risk reduction, by gathering that data, now it's going to be able to understand, well, are those forecasts being achieved in terms of risk reduction? And related to that is the concern or topic about, like, how do you measure effectiveness on something that is infrequent in terms of an event that gets realized, like a failure? And I think that Matthew addressed that to a limited extent, or talked about it a little bit, is like, well, what other measures can a utility use to evaluate the effectiveness of a mitigation? And I think overall, we can all learn from how different utilities approach that. If they're proposing or forecasting a mitigation, obviously there's going to be alternatives. And how do they decide on a mitigation when there are alternatives? And each of these may be mitigating a very rare event. And so then the question becomes, how does a utility make those decisions? What factors does it use? And some of these mitigations can be quite costly. And so it becomes a very important element to figure out how is a utility evaluating the effectiveness in making these large dollar decisions. I mean, for example, there are leading metrics, leading indicator metrics that may apply. For example, I think Matthew may have been discussing inspections. What do you find from inspections? Are these early indicators of whether a mitigation is effective? Corrective actions. Are you repeating the same corrective actions all the time? Those kind of things. And utilities may have different ways of doing that. And I think we could all learn from the utilities in terms of how do they make those decisions? How do they evaluate the effectiveness of mitigations when the events are really rare? So I think we can learn from that. And then also over time, I think we can get a real better solid validation of the effectiveness of mitigation. So I think it would be valuable to have that information gathered over time to inform the commission to improve things in the long haul. So that was input on those topics.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for your input. We will be adding a question about how many years after the use and useful date that mitigations, the utility should continue reporting on the mitigations. So we look forward to hearing party comments on that. And Alan, you're next.
Hello, everybody. Alan Catuli, SoCal Gas. Good to see everybody. Good to see you, Emily. There's a lot of complexities, and I'm a mathematician. I know there's even more complexities that we can't even talk about. So I was wondering if there's openness to a piloting, because we really don't know what's underneath the murky water until you step in, and you'll find more challenges than the obvious ones that are being brought up here. From experience, I know you have to kind of get your feet wet to really understand what the challenges are. And there's just so much complexity and backcasting, all these devils in the detail. So I just wanted to, bring that up in the workshop to say, piloting would be prudent, something we might want to consider. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Alan. Yumi?
Hello, this is Yumi from PG&E. Good to see you all. I have a question as a follow-up to Gary's question on the multiple GRC cycles, this slide. What do you think about a mitigation program that spans many decades? So example of that will be pipeline replacement program, where there are thousands of miles to replace. And each individual project might have used and useful date when the project is complete. But then we move on to another project, right, within that mitigation program. And so at the mitigation level, it's hard to determine. At the project level, we can determine when the project becomes used and useful. But at the mitigation level, there's no one used and useful date for the mitigation until all of the projects are completed within it. And for each GRC cycle, we would submit different amount of work units for that GRC period, and then move on to another set of mitigations, another set of miles to work on under the same mitigation. So how should that be treated when we cross over different GRC period for the same mitigation, but different forecasts? We may or may not have completed all, but there are always reprioritization that's happening within the program. So that's the question on how you would keep track of those and how you want this table to be adapting to a different GRC cycle.
Thank you for your question, Yumi. I understand that what you're asking is the same mitigation program uh, that is in one GRC cycle will also be in the next GRC cycle. I believe you would just continue reporting on that program in the next GRC cycle. But if there are any mitigations that are incomplete from the previous GRC cycle, then you would submit a different RMAR identifying the test year of the GRC as well as the reporting year. So for example, if you have a mitigation from the previous GRC cycle that is incomplete, then you would submit a different RMAR for that. But at the same time, you're going to have to continue reporting on the current GRC cycle as well. So you will be submitting two different RMARs, one for the previous GRC cycle and one for the current GRC cycle, and both can contain the same programs. So I would imagine the projects would be, or the RUs, or sorry, the projects would be different.
So then it would be complete. So existing the first GRC cycle, the RMAR reporting would be complete only when all of the miles that were original in the original plan will be complete.
Sorry, I'm not.
So
I don't believe I understand your question.
Yeah. So let's say in the current GRC cycle, we have adopted the forecast of 400 miles over the 4-year time period, and then the next GRC cycle, let's say we propose to do, or we get to adopt adopted number of miles of 500 miles in the next cycle, and then let's say until the 400 initial miles are done, we should continue to report that 400 miles through the existing, like the current cycle RMAR, without including that miles, that the gap of the miles in the next cycle of the RMAR. Is that the idea?
I see that Fred has his hand up, so I'll let him talk. He might have something to say to your question.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Our concept, I think, is like your example was we're proposing 400 miles in, say, the current GRC. The idea would be to follow those 400 miles with a series of RMAR reports until they're all completed. And that could very well take more than 4 years to complete. But those were the 400 miles that were approved to be funded in a given GRC. And so the concept is let's get a report on how that works out for that specific set. Now, if you come along and the next GRC occurs and a new batch of miles is proposed to be done, then we would start receiving a report in a new RMAR report, like indicated on the slide. That would be RMAR 2. And you would continue to report under RMAR 1 on the earlier GRC's set of miles until they had been completed. So that you could end up very likely having parallel, RMARs for existing work that was still ongoing from previous GRCs. So that's our concept.
Yeah, thank you, Fred, and good to see you. I think it can create a really real complexity because pre-mitigated risk needs to be reported, but then pre-mitigated risk should that so for the second RMAR cycle, for preparing the pre-mitigation risk to start with, we know that, let's say we didn't do 400 miles at that point, and let's say we did only 200 miles, so 200 miles are remaining. So then the pre-mitigation risk for the next RMAR report should reflect that, 200 was not done, so risk is higher. Although when we complete in the first cycle that 200 miles, we would continue to reduce the pre-mitigation risk in the second RMAR to reflect the work that was done in the first RMAR cycle.
I see your question. That's an interesting challenge. And I don't think our team really had thought about that particular wrinkle. You can certainly bring it up as a comment. And if our level 4 expert may want to throw in a suggestion at this time, that would be welcome. I mean, there's probably more than one way to resolve it. But I think it's a great question.
Thank you.
So Fred, I'll jump in. We recognize that having multiple RMARs, tying to the relevant GRC can pose some complexity. I do think there are ways around it to create protocols in the case that you've raised of how to coordinate between the two. And to say this is what we mean by pre-mitigated risk, for the second RMAR, based on what we've completed for the first RMAR. Fortunately, we have a fair number of years before we get to that point to think these things through. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one more question. Stefan?
Thank you, Stefan Shonchak from Energy Safety. Could we, just a point of clarification and then maybe a follow-up question, could we go back to, I think it was slide 22, which showed, a similar one with some numbers filled out? Uh, 23. Yeah, so in this chart, when we're seeing year 1, year 2, year 3, is that expected to be the benefits which were experienced in that year, or the expectation of the accumulated benefits over the lifetime of the program discounted to that year?
I believe it's just for that year. Matthew can correct
Yeah,
me if
sure. Let me.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the mitigation benefit is for each individual year, and that's why the total is adding it. So the mitigation benefit is 10 in year 1 because let's say it didn't happen until 6 months into the year, and then the full year in year 2 of 20 and year 3 of 20, you add that up as 50 because this is a flow calculation. And yes, in reality these would be discounted.
Okay, so then that was going to be kind of my follow-up is like, are these expected to be discounted? If so, are they following the discount rates set forth like in the CBR proceedings?
Yeah.
And then like,
so can I clarify?
Then like, how is that how is it a total if we're not discounting over the entire time period?
Let me just go in the report itself is going to be undiscounted. There'll be the nominal values. For calculating the BCR, you would discount the whole streams. And in fact, going back to a prior question, if you have a 50-year mitigation, your discounting of it would be all 50 years. It just, you wouldn't see that in the RMAR report because you're not asking for a 50-year pro forma. But your model will be discounting it based on the full, life of the mitigation.
All right. Thank you. That answered my questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Stefan. We are in time for break. Brian, Chris, I know you have your hands up. Please put your questions in the chat. We will gather them and compile answers for them and then send them out to the service list. Thank you. And let's come back from break at 2:30. All right, it's 2:30. Before we get started, I'll take a couple seconds to address Brian's question. I see that you put in the chat, does staff plan to provide a red line version of their original proposal to address some of the comments / questions that parties are bringing up today? To answer your question, Brian, SPD will revise the RMAR staff proposal number 2 to include certain changes, and we'll share this and the red line version and the post workshop questions on January 15th. All right. Hope everyone had a nice break. Now we will proceed to a set of discussion questions aimed at getting party feedback on the staff proposal. These questions will also serve as post-workshop questions on which parties will provide opening comments. Next slide, please. So the first question is, should the commission adopt the RMAR filing schedules as presented in tables 2.2 and 2.3 of the RMAR staff proposal number 2? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and provide alternative filing schedules. If anybody have any feedback on this, please raise your hand. Yes, Yumi.
So 2.2 is about annual filing date of April 30, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I think for RMAR,
correction, that would be, I believe that's table 2. Yes, no, you're right. That's table 2.2. It's the annual filing, and then the 2.3 is the plan phase filing.
Yes. So for 2.2, for the annual filing schedule, RSAR filing is April 30, and I believe the proposed table 2.2 April 30 is based on RSAR filing schedule. But I would like to note that the RMAR is more involved process. No, it starts with the data that's in the RSAR report. And then we will need to do a lot more analysis using it to produce all of the narrative and analysis about, and then backcasting and recasting. And so we think that it's unreasonable to finish that up by RSAR time. And rather, probably it needs to be after, like maybe 3 months after or 4 months after the RSAR filing is due. So that's one comment. And then the second comment is that RSAR filing is often delayed. So we ask for extension, and this year also got granted to file in July. The setting the RMAR due date we based on RSAR due date will help us to not to file for RMAR filing extension when RSAR filing is extended. So that will be our recommendation. So that RMAR filing will be dependent on the RSAR filing due date, and it needs to be at least 3 months or 4 months after the RSAR filing due. The second point is that another support for that is that during the RMAR reporting phase, 2 out of 4 years will have to file RAMP and GRC. And so new models will be developed for that year. So if the RMAR filing is like in April, the same people will have to work on RMAR filing as well as the RAMP or GRC, and that will be overly burdensome, and it will sacrifice the quality of any of the filings. And so we highly recommend that the RMAR filing will be somewhat later in the year so that it does not overlap with the preparation of the RAMP and GRC.
Yeah, thank you, Yumi, for your comment. We would appreciate to hear this in the opening comments as well. So please put that in your opening comments.
Please do.
And Dan, you're next.
Yeah, maybe just to piggyback on what Yumi was saying, I think we also, at least I'm not sure if all three of the IOUs do, but I know at least SCE and I believe PG&E does, have what we call like grid hardening accountability reports or system hardening accountability reports that are focused on one or two controls and mitigations, typically just covered conductor and tug. And those accountability reports, which have a similar theme to this, are due in July. And so, you know, when the RMAR expands to all controls, all risks, it seems like, to the points that Yumi was bringing up, the interrelationship with the RSAR and these other filings, it does seem like that April date may be a little aggressive. And so once again, we can put that in our comments, but just wanted to piggyback on what Yumi said. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Chris Parks with the Cal Advocates. We did, we heard what folks were saying. Actually, we were planning to comment on this, and I guess we can put it into our written comments. But we did want to highlight that there are some advantages to keeping them on the same schedule as the RSARs, because in that way, the commission and parties can compare the utilities' achieved risk reduction side by side with the related costs at the program level to better measure the cost effectiveness of the risk mitigations performed. So I hear what we were just hearing. I do want to point out, though, that there are some advantages and some pros to keeping them kind of all on the same schedule. And one of the things that you know, we have to manage also is with the RSARs. We're seeing a lot of times where there's been a delay or an extension on those dates, which then causes us to have to kind of adjust our schedule when those extensions come through. I'm not immediately sure about how to manage that, but anyway, everyone can put in their comments with the written comments. I just want to point out there are some advantages to kind of keeping things in sync.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yumi, I know you have your hand up, but I think we should move on to the next question because we only have about 50 minutes for this. So if you have additional comments on this, please put it in your opening comments. The next question is, should the commission require PG&E, sorry, go back to one slide. We have a second question on that slide. Should the commission require PG&E to begin filing annual RMARs for its 2027 GRC, Sempra for its 2028 GRC, and SCE for its 2029 GRC? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and when PG&E, Sempra, and SCE should begin filing annual RMARs.
Can I answer?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes. So RMAR, to the extent that we read from the phase 4 decision and the step guideline, one of the building blocks of the RMAR report is the RRU development. And it's written in the decision. And so we really think that it needs to be combined or in the cycle that RRU are required. And for PG&E's 2027 GRC, does do not have the RRU developed because the phase 4 decision does not apply to here. And RRUs will be developed and required for 2028 REMP filing or 2031 PG&E's GRC. And so it is our position that RMAR should be required for PG&E starting from 2031 GRC so that we can leverage the information from the RRUs for the RMAR.
Thank you, Yumi. Anna?
Hi, it is Anna Yang with Cal Advocates. Our position is that, yes, we should start filing the RMARs as soon as possible. The sooner we start having the filing coming in, the sooner we can review it. And that means the sooner we can start seeing how it's actually working and we can start making refinements to it sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Dan?
I think that is why the IOUs have asked to pilot some of this, because it is a very complex filing. And so I can't remember if it was Sempra or PG&E who brought that up earlier, but I think there may be an appetite to do smaller versions, look at one or two risks or something of that nature, just to work through these, because I think others had mentioned, until you really get into the weeds and start filling out all these tables, it's a little hard to figure out where all the challenges may arise. I think we have some ideas, which we've been discussing both in phase 4 and here today, but I also think we need to be cognizant of making sure that the decisions that we are basing these RMARs have the information necessary in order to do a detailed analysis like this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I think we should move on to the next question. Next slide. Should the commission require a utility to continue filing RMARs for risk mitigations and/or relevant risk events until the risk mitigations are used and useful? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and provide a solution for the commission to track risk mitigations that span multiple GRC cycles. Yes, Yumi?
Yes, as I asked earlier, I think more clarification would be helpful here about different cases. The other case that I wanted to bring up for this one was if the projects are canceled, then even before the projects are becoming used and useful. So maybe the clarity is needed to consider those cases that are not always going to require implementing when the information changes or things change.
Thank you, Yumi. All right, next question. Next slide, please. The RMAR staff proposal number 2 recommends that the commission require utilities to present a methodology demonstrating its confidence that observed results were due to mitigation effectiveness as opposed to other factors. The methodology should include, but is not limited to, the following elements: any mathematical formulas or assumptions taken, any experimental procedures, any statistical analysis conducted, and any supporting data sets. Should the methodology include other elements? If yes, explain what the elements are and why the methodology should include these elements. How should confidence be presented? For example, as a percentage. Explain your answer. Yes, Ali?
So thanks for that question. So we, again, this is something we extensively discussed. Should RMAR be adopted, the final version of it, we could potentially support this, and we see benefit in it, provided that we could take a look at this both side of the aisle. I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, we also acknowledge this could be a very complex process. Complex methodology needs to be developed. The way we see this is we need a lot, basically counterfactual thinking and develop counterfactual risk metrics that would help us to understand if, again, the spirit of this question is, if there is success, we need to demonstrate that we earned that success and it was not due to other factors beyond mitigation, that we put in place. So again, the benefit that we see on that aspect of it is it could help us to measure our success, and it could also be a good feedback loop for us to understand, where we need to do better. However, and again, the benefit of that also is if we have an extremely successful program, let's say to mitigate certain risk, it will help us not to become complacent. I mean, when I say us, I mean all stakeholders, and it won't be taken for granted. On the other side, we believe if we adopt this, it would only be fair that we do the same thing when things are not so great. Like if there is an event, if we exceed thresholds, we should also do by the same account, by the same standard. We also need to find out, we use the same methodologies and approach to find out how much of that was because of the change in the risk environment and factors beyond mitigation that we put in place. So overall, I think if both side of the idea to be considered, it could potentially be something that we see benefit in. We could support it, provided that and acknowledging that methodological aspect of that will be complex and it takes time and effort and lots of calibration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. No other comments? Okay. Next, oh, Chris.
Yeah, Chris Parks with Cal Advocates. Regarding the mitigation effectiveness as opposed to other factors. And we're also talking about the other parts of this too, right? Should other methodology include other elements? So related to this subject, it should include all the specific data that the utility uses to assess, evaluate effectiveness and performance of mitigations. And that could include, but not be limited to, for example, frequency of events, ignition rates, leak rates, unplanned maintenance, any information that a utility would find useful in evaluating the effectiveness of the mitigations. That would be a suggestion on this.
Thank you, Chris. Please put that in your comments. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So one, this has been a concern. We brought it up in phase 4 comments, and we attempted to bring it up earlier, but unfortunately we didn't get to it till just now. But I appreciate you asking this question. So one thing that would be useful in the context of risk events that particularly involve meteorological conditions is an understanding of long-term trends. We shouldn't be penalized, for instance, if there's one bad weather year or 3 in a row, like 2017 through 2018. I'm sorry, 2017 through 2020. So we should consider not just the trend in that year, but also the longer term trends for any exogenous factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. Should the Commission adopt the triggers for recast, backcast, and replan as presented in Table 5.2 of the RMAR staff proposal number 2? If yes, explain why. If yes, and if the list of organizational changes, for example, merging or renaming of circuits, redefining of territory boundaries and risk tranches, combining or splitting of mitigations, should include other organizational changes, describe the organizational change, and explain why it should be included. If yes, explain what threshold level, for example, 10% in change, should be used to require a recast or backcast when there are changes to the original model. Which values in the RMAR tables should the threshold level be applied to? If no, explain why and provide alternative triggers for recast, backcast, and replan. Yes, Ali?
Thanks for that question. I would answer the first part of it, and my colleague Yumi will might answer the second part depending on where it goes. So, should this be adopted? We believe that the answer. I wish there was an answer that was other than yes and no, or maybe it depends. It really depends on what that trigger is going to be used for. If these triggers are being used to look at the process, for example, addressing model risk management, and the entire governance of model governance and everything that we do to come up with the predictions for example, looking at the process, we could do our best, and this triggers if they are indicator of some, lack of effectiveness in what we are doing and control, or, potentially that could be beneficial if that is the case. However, we also think that like we should avoid, that we will caution that arbitrary triggers, for example, 10% or 20% or any number, probably is not going to be a reasonable approach to go about it. I understand that this RMAR is heavily inspired by financial industry based on what we read. And by the same account, for example, there are approaches when it comes to, for example, again, how many standard deviation from the mean, if you're using a statistical model or expected value, that deviation should be. And it also, that trigger wouldn't be in one period, multiple repeat of a breach of, that target range. It could raise, could be a, indicator of something that needs to be looked at in our models. But again, we don't think we can be responsible or we can control the outcome. All we can do is to do our best in our modeling process and our planning process. But we believe that we should not be held accountable for the stochasticity of the events that is beyond. That's just the nature of life, and it's the nature of these models. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Yes, Yumi?
Yes, thank you, Emily. And what I want to discuss or bring up is the question on whether the thresholds are actually needed or triggers are needed for recasts or backcasts, and rather can be left for utilities to decide whether they want to apply new risk model to the RMAR report. And if they decide to do so, that they have to do recast and backcast. And the reason that I say this is that any set threshold and trying to see the proof of whether it has changed or not, and how to prove that, and that becomes a lot more burden, I think. So rather than, and also utilities might have a best incentive to change the risk models if we want to show the changes in the risk reduction is due to the changes in the circumstances, and we want to use or be judged upon the most accurate information as possible. So we can make the decision around the trade-off between like the burden of doing recast and backcast versus being evaluated on the less accurate information back then. And so I think that it might be reasonable to leave this up to utilities to decide on whether they want to use the new risk model for RMAR report. And then if they do, then they will provide recast and backcast so that the reviewers, interveners, and the SPD staff can understand what is driven by the change in the risk models versus not.
Thank you, Yumi. Next question. Next slide, please. Should the commission not require a utility to complete any of the RMAR tables for the original ramp backcast? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and identify which RMAR tables a utility should complete for its original ramp backcast. Yes, Anna?
This is Anna. This would ensure an apples-to-apples comparison in the same format between the different version of models, and this will also help us better understand the impact of the mitigations. Thank you.
Anna, you cut out at the beginning. Could you repeat what you said at the beginning?
Oh, okay. So we believe that all of the the RMAR tables should be required for the original ramp backcast. This would ensure an apples to apples comparison in the same format between the different versions of models, and it would also help us better understand the impact of the mitigations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, should the commission require a utility to complete all RMAR tables for recast and backcast? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and identify which RMAR tables a utility should not be required to complete for its recast and backcast. Provide a solution for maintaining comparability of the RMAR tables when a recast or backcast is done. I just want to point out that this question is about recast and backcast going forward. It's different from the original ramp backcast. Yes, Yumi?
Thank you. While we understand the desire to have backcast and recast results to be able to understand the changes, but I would like to caution that this will be a lot of information, and RMAR tables are, I think, if we count sub-tables, it's more than 10 or probably more. And so we caution that like inundation of data associated with recast and backcast and explaining all that for all of the RMAR tables. And the cost, I mean, if we submit all of the tables, then there's additional costs, right, in associated with creating the data, reviewing, quality checking, and also analyzing, and also interveners and staff like reviewing those data. And so our recommendation is that required tables are limited to only a few subtables or tables that are somewhat higher level, not the most granular level. And then having the interveners and SPD staff ask for data requests when they during their evaluation if that's needed, so that we can limit like initial submission, the data, the amount of the data that we submit, and then recognize that if it's needed, it can be available. So that is my comment.
Thank you, Yumi. I don't see any more hands, so we can move on to the next slide. Before, should the commission adopt a process for making changes to the RMAR guidelines similar to the process adopted in the phase 4 decision, D2508032, for making changes to the ramp data template? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not, and provide an alternative process for making changes to the RMAR guidelines. Yes, Dan?
I think I'd just like to maybe piggyback a little bit. I think when Miles said this earlier in the presentation, that like this seems to be circumventing, you know, the proceeding process, which I think for something as important as the RMAR that also has potential enforcement mechanisms. I'm not sure that this 15-day comment process that is sufficient, especially if there are significant changes that have significant impacts on a lot of these filings. So I think we'll provide more detail in our comments, but I'm not sure that it's appropriate to be able to make potentially wholesale changes to something in a shortened procedural process.
Thank you, Dan. Should the commission add the expected value of risk mitigation benefit and mitigation costs by risk event table, the stock version, as a required table in the reporting phase of the RMAR? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not. I don't see any.
Maybe just,
Dan.
sorry, I unmuted before I raised the hand there, sorry. I think this goes a little bit to about the useful life discussion and how long these tables would need to be presented. So I think it's a little difficult to answer that until that other kind of question maybe also is answered.
Thank you. Should the commission improve existing RMAR tables by adding total fields and or relevant compared to what fields? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not. Yes, Anna?
Yes, because, oh, this is Anna with Cal Advocates. Yes, because with the totals field and the comparison field, I think it adds to the readability purpose. It is easier to read. We don't have to do calculations ourselves. And also with the comparison field, it just kind of give us a look at the bigger picture, you know, what's done compared to the overall existing risk. So yeah, these will be pretty helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I don't see any more hands, and we actually have time left over for on the clock. So first, I would like to ask, are there any other comments that anyone would like to provide on the discussion questions that we just went over? Yes, Dan?
Just out of curiosity, are the discussion questions that you're going to be providing, or maybe the comment questions that you're going to be providing next Thursday, are they going to be additional questions in addition to this, or is it just going to be these that you're looking for formal comments on?
We anticipate that there will be a couple more. For example, there might be a question on the tail risk table, whether that should be optional or not. And there might be a question about how many years after the use and useful date that utilities should report risk mitigation songs. So those two might be additional questions to this list.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more comments on the discussion questions here, then I would like to circle back to the presentation to see if there are any other questions that attendees might have. I don't hear anything, so I assume that we don't have any questions on the presentation right now. So we can proceed to the next slide, which is closing out this workshop and then discussing next steps. Next slide, please. So the recording of this workshop will be available on YouTube in a couple of days. As I said before, SPD will share a post-workshop proposal and post-workshop questions on January 15th. And then opening comments are due February 4th and reply comments February 16th. And these opening and reply comments will be based on the post-workshop proposal and post-workshop questions. And between that time frame, party proposals on utility accountability are due on February 9th. SPD anticipates there will be workshops on utility accountability and one or more draft resolutions on the RMAR issues, but we don't have the dates on these yet. So lastly, I just want to say thank you for your time participation at this workshop. We look forward to your opening comments.
Apologies.
Yep, that is the end.
One quick
Yes.
procedural thing. I assume these comments would still go to the risk proceeding R20-07013. Is that, or do we just provide them back to this service list? I wasn't sure exactly what the guidance is since the proceeding's closed.
Yeah, the proceeding is closed. So the opening comments would be provided to the service list as far as I understand, also to SPD as well. So we will be providing more if directions and clarifications on that step.
Okay, thank you.
And that concludes our workshop. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Great job.
Eleanor, the workshop's closed now, and I think you were asking me about whether we need to produce a chat at the end of this, actually.
Yeah. So there's not much in the chat.